Well, I really intended on coming out here and reading about a very highly likely candidate pick as Treasury Secretary for Trump, who is an anti-Fed libertarian. That's a good thing. Who wants to return to the gold standard. That's a good thing. His name is John Allison, former CEO of the bank BB&T and one of the libertarian nonprofit think tanks in the Cato Institute. Interestingly, though, because this article may be null and void, but I just want to read you this first part. While speculation swirls over Trump's pick for the next Treasury Secretary, with eyebrows raised after the president-elect unexpectedly met with Goldman Sachs COO Gary Cohn earlier in the day, one of the more interesting names to have emerged in the running for the top economic post is that of John Allison, former CEO of BB&T. So he met with Goldman Sachs. Now, remember I told you something many, many months ago when it first came up. And I mentioned it again recently because the guy was still there. He was still manning the post in Trump's cabinet, or transition team, I should say. And that is a man by the name of Stephen Mnuchin. I've already mentioned him 2 times now. Former Goldman Sachs banker and at one time a George Soros employee. So the last video I did on this guy, I just kind of said, maybe, just maybe, the guy worked for these people and realized I don't want nothing to do with them and left and went and did his own thing. Because he did leave years ago, it looks like, and did his own thing, has his own company. So he left the vampire squid Goldman Sachs, left the, I don't know if you want to call him Satan himself or something, George Soros, a while back. However, you know me. You know old Snippy, Jay Snip. When I see someone who works at one of these club member banks or any entity that they've ever had, my first instinct is that's not good. I know what that means. More of the same. Ron Paul warned Donald Trump, beware of the shadow government surrounding you with its people for advisors. Ron Paul warned him immediately after he won. So this is, I thought I was coming out here today to read you a good story. Trump Treasury Secretary candidate is anti-Fed libertarian who wants to return to the gold standard. I thought I was going to come out here and read that and tell you why it's fantastic. But it appears, now this is the New York Times and CBS reporting that it's supposedly official. Are they creating more fake news or not? But he did just meet with Goldman's COO. Trump picks former Goldman banker Stephen Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary. While it is yet to be officially confirmed by the Trump transition team, moments ago the New York Times reported that, in what had previously been leaked on several occasions on various other outlets, most notably the Wall Street Journal, former Goldman banker and Soros employee Stephen Mnuchin, who's a financier with deep roots on Wall Street and in Hollywood, but no government experience, is expected to be named Donald J. Trump's Treasury Secretary as soon as Wednesday. So it's not looking good. Not looking good. Now, again, this could be here. This is hearsay at this point until it is officially announced. And by the time you're reading this or seeing this video tomorrow morning, it might already be announced. The Wall Street Journal has confirmed as much, reporting that President-elect Donald Trump will name longtime banker and former Goldman Sachs executive Stephen Mnuchin as Treasury Secretary, turning to a campaign loyalist and fundraiser for the incoming administration's top economic cabinet post, a transition official said Tuesday. From the New York Times, Mnuchin, 53, was the national finance chairman for Mr. Trump's campaign And that's the one I first reported to you guys when I first saw him pull him in. I said, that's. I don't even know what the video is called, actually, but I guarantee I could find it if I had to. It was just earlier this year. He began his career at Goldman Sachs, where he became a partner before creating his own hedge fund, moving to the West Coast and entering the first rank of movie financiers by bankrolling hits like the X-Men franchise and Avatar. So again, did he get in with the Goldman, the boys, make some money? I'm leaving. I don't like what I'm seeing here. I'm going to go peddling, movie making as far as financing goes. Started his own hedge fund and all that stuff. So, I mean, if you want to hope and pray, I'm with you. Go ahead. Let's hope and pray for that. But when you have that resume at Goldman and at some point you worked at George Soros for him, and Donald Trump is clearly aware about what George Soros is doing. I mean, he does. He's talked about it. So if that's the case, and he also knows this guy worked for him, Soros, and Goldman, the club, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean that maybe he knows the guy well enough that, hey, I worked for them, I can't do that, I left them and I started my own business. I don't want to be tied to those people, so I left years ago. And maybe that's all there is to this. The other guy, Allison, what was his name? John Allison. Oh, he sounds like the fantastic pick for Treasury Secretary. Anti-Fed, Federal Reserve. Anti-Fed libertarian who wants to return to the gold standard. I don't even need to read another word after hearing that headline. That's a pick 'em. Choose 'em. Done. But that's not the case. So we will have to wait till Wednesday to see what the official announcement is. But I don't know. Don't know if it's really looking too good. As Treasury Secretary, Mr. Mnuchin would play an important role in shaping the administration's economic policies, including a package of promised tax cuts, increased spending on infrastructure, and changes in the terms of foreign trade. He could also help lead any effort to roll back President Obama's nuclear deal with Iran and opening to Cuba by reimposing sanctions on Tehran and Havana. And as the New York Times has added, his first selection fits uneasy with much of Mr. Trump's campaign rhetoric attacking the financial industry. Mr. Trump, in a campaign ad intended as a closing argument, portrayed the chief executive of Goldman Sachs as the personification of a global elite that the ad said had robbed our working class. But the New York Times notes Mnuchin has said that he agrees with Mr. Trump's priorities, and he was an early supporter of a candidate who clearly prizes loyalty. So, I don't know what to make of that. When Mr. Trump won New York's Republican presidential primary in April, Mr. Mnuchin attended the victory party. The next day, he accepted Mr. Trump's invitation to become the campaign's national finance director. A number of Mr. Mnuchin's friends made comments to various publications expressing shock at the decision. Mr. Mnuchin was unfazed. Quote, "Nobody's going to be like, well, why did he do this if I end up in the administration," he told Bloomberg Businessweek. As the Wall Street Journal has added, Mr. Mnuchin's Wall Street pedigree presents a contrast with the populist themes Mr. Trump struck in his campaign, railing against big banks and vowing to close tax loopholes that benefit hedge funds. Mr. Trump also repeatedly attacked his rivals in the primary and general elections for their Wall Street ties, especially those connected to Goldman Sachs. End quote. If confirmed by the Senate as Treasury Secretary, Mr. Mnuchin will join a list of prominent bankers who made similar moves from Wall Street to Washington, including two of his former bosses at Goldman Sachs, Mr. Henry Paulson and Robert Rubin, who were both top Goldman executives before running the Treasury as Secretary. So let's get this straight. We had two previous Goldman Sachs boys running the Treasury. And now we have another one who Trump has chosen. I think I had a little reason to be concerned when I first did that video many months ago. Again, I hope that's not the case. And as Zero Hedge says, for those who have missed our previous piece on the career banker, here are some more details on Mnuchin's background from the Wall Street Journal. Despite his successful Wall Street career, Mr. Mnuchin has no experience running a massive organization. The Treasury Department has 86,000 employees. Well, I'm sure the other two Goldman Sachs boys didn't either, nor did little Timmy Geithner, okay? Just like President Obama is not even kind of qualified to be the president. First-term senator. What? So despite his successful career on Wall Street, he has no experience running a massive organization. The Treasury Department has 86,000 employees, or in economic or financial policy making. The biggest entity Mr. Mnuchin has run was the technology division of Goldman, which had over 5,000 employees. His acquaintances describe him as smart, with several people calling him nerdy. He regularly attends New York philanthropic galas. He has long held high-profile positions on charity boards and is a former director of the Whitney Museum of American Art. At an event for New York charity City Harvest in 2006, he and his ex-wife were photographed with Mr. Trump. Mr. Mnuchin is now engaged to Scottish actress Louise Linton. Mr. Mnuchin joined Goldman in 1985, so this is going back some serious time. He worked in the fixed income department, eventually overseeing trading in mortgages, U.S. government, money market, and municipal bonds. He made partner in 1994. Mr. Mnuchin later became the firm's chief information officer. When Goldman converted into a publicly traded company in 1999, Mr. Mnuchin, like other partners, made millions. He later bought a 6,500 square foot apartment in 740 Park Avenue, a storied Manhattan co-op built by Jackie Kennedy's grandfather that is known as the Billionaires Building. At a recent conference, Goldman CEO Lloyd Blankfein called Mr. Mnuchin a high flyer, a partner at a young age. He did very well. He is a smart guy. In 2002, Mr. Mnuchin left Goldman and later was hired to run a credit fund set up by billionaire George Soros. In 2004, he and two former Goldman colleagues founded hedge fund Dune Capital Management LP with financial backing from Mr. Soros. Dune soon expanded into the entertainment business, striking up a film financing deal with a unit of 21st Century Fox. Among the films Dune financed was Avatar, one of the all-time box office hits. 21st Century Fox and News Corp, parent company of the Wall Street Journal, share common ownership. In 2008, IndyMac Bank in Pasadena, California, collapsed in one of the largest bank failures in U.S. history. Mr. Mnuchin led a group of investors, including funds run by George Soros and other hedge fund and private equity titans, who bought it from the government for about $1.5 billion. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corp, or FDIC, agreed to cover a portion of any future loan losses, a lucrative arrangement for Mr. Mnuchin and his partners. Regulators who negotiated with Mr. Mnuchin found him to be the kind of detail-oriented person who would know the cost of every pencil, according to a person familiar with their thinking. Mr. Mnuchin, who became chairman of the renamed One West Bank and CEO of its parent company, relocated to Los Angeles and bought a mansion in the Bel Air neighborhood. The deal soon became controversial. In 2011, community activists descended on Mr. Mnuchin's Bel Air home to protest over the possible eviction of a homeowner who was behind on her mortgage payments to One West. In 2014, One West was sold to CIT Group, Inc., earning Mr. Mnuchin and Dune hundreds of millions of dollars in profits, according to a person familiar with the matter. He later pocketed $10.9 million in severance payouts when he left the company. Despite the huge profits, One West's legacy continues to trail Mr. Mnuchin, who now sits on CIT's board and owns more than 1% of its shares. A portion of One West's mortgage business is under investigation by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Last July, CIT said it was forced to take a $230 million charge as it cleaned up accounting problems at One West. So, what does that mean? One West, the bank, has been cooking their books? Yeah. They all do. As I said, quick look surprised. And two California housing groups this month accused One West of discriminating against minorities by not putting branches in their communities. Meanwhile, 14 years after leaving Goldman, Mr. Mnuchin remains in the firm's orbit, showing up at alumni events and involving other ex-Goldman executives in his franchise deals. He has continued to work those angles as Mr. Trump's finance chairman, a post he assumed in May. Mr. Mnuchin negotiated a fundraising agreement with the Republican National Committee, easing the way for major donors to give both to the party and to Mr. Trump. The committee's chairman, Louis Eisenberg, is a Goldman veteran and contemporary of Mr. Mnuchin's father. And as Arrowhead says, even though the nomination is still unofficial, moments ago, CBS reporter Charlie Key tweeted that it can also confirm that Trump has chosen Steven Mnuchin as his nominee for Treasury Secretary. And I'm going to read you the very first comment somebody made on Zero Hedge. Second comment. I wonder how many Trump supporters will now admit to buyer's remorse. Are we still better than a Hillary Clinton presidency? Abso-freaking-lutely. But I don't like this one way or the other. And it's not fun reporting this. But I already reported it when he became the finance chairman on his campaign trail, whatever. I reported the other day where he's back in the spotlight. They may pick him. They might pick him. Did a video then. Now I'm doing one because going to two mainstream media outlets, and they don't report fake news now, do they? They have said it's official. He has been chosen. So, not too sure if I like this, but I'll sit back a little while and see what happens. See ya.